Good morning, everyone. So pleased that you could join us today. My name is Marianne Kensel. I'm the Executive Officer of the Refrigerated Warehouse and Transport Association of Australia. Today, I'm speaking with Carlos Flores from NABERS, which stands for the National Australian Built Environment Rating System. Good morning, Carlos.
Good morning. It's great to be here.
Thank you for coming along. Carlos, can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and about NABERS, please, and who they are governed by?
100%. So I am the National Director of NABERS, and I'm personally a mechanical engineer. And a lot of my background is actually on refrigeration and air conditioning. So working with cold stores and warehouses really feels like a little bit like coming back home to me. So it's really exciting. The NABERS is a program that it's one of the longest running sustainability programs in Australia, and one of the most successful as well. And we're really known for working with businesses and buildings. And we started 20 years ago in the late 90s, originally with the office sector. And what's happened in the last 2 decades is that the program's been expanding to capture a lot of other sectors of the economy. Yes. So we went to shopping centers a few years ago, which is also part of the classic building sector. But then we've been tackling a lot of sectors and working with sectors that are just they don't see themselves as part of the building sector, like hotels and accommodation, or IT technology data centers, or the hospital and healthcare sector, or residential aged care. A lot of different buildings that happen to be doing a lot of work behind, for walls, but they're not necessarily they're not property companies. They're really productive sectors of the economy. And so that's a program in a nutshell. We are a sustainability initiative, and we are government. And what I say we're government is we have a very peculiar and really interesting governance structure where we, as a director of NABERS, I actually report to a national board, and that board is all the Australian states and the Australian government. Mm-hmm. And we also have big industry bodies that don't vote, but they actually sit in our governance and participate in all the discussions. And we actually, and this is something that I don't want to put you on the spot, Marianne, but we actually refreshed this group to incorporate a lot of stakeholders and industry bodies in new sectors that we're expanding to. And we love for the RWTA to actually join this group in the future as we expand to this sector. So we're just starting the work on that. We're a little while away from having a NABERS tool for cold stores. And also we're doing at the same time, we're working with warehouses as well. Right. So 2 sectors at once. But in the future, I see this as the beginning of a long-term relationship of working really closely with this sector.
Excellent. Thank you for the invitation. I dare say we will probably take that up. And the reason behind that is, as a high energy usage sector, the cold chain is well aware that they need to drive energy efficiency. Energy usage in cold stores is exponentially higher than a non-refrigerated warehouse and quite different from any other industrial or office-based structure. The energy performance standards for industrial buildings will need to reflect the unique role that cold storage facilities and their energy challenges that are involved with maintaining that confidence in food quality every day that is distinct from non-refrigerated warehouses. There's a wide range of energy requirements associated with different essential cold storage services, such as blast freezing, that are an absolute world away from other facilities. So with this in mind, can you tell me, Carlos, how have NABERS ratings benefited existing sectors, and how do you believe that it will assist the Australian cold chain?
Yes, I think it's so interesting that you mentioned that this sector is different and separate from warehouses and other parts of the industrial sector, because I think it's a really important point, and it's also really essential to how we work with industry in all the sectors that we're in. Mm-hmm. When we work with, we don't compare a hotel against an office, even though some people classify all of them as part of the building sector. They're not. They're completely different. They're operated differently. They use energy very differently. And I think cold stores is the same thing. I mean, refrigeration is so different than a warehouse with lots of boxes. And the only reason why some people might actually compare them is because they see them as maybe part of the retail industry or part of the industrial sector, exactly. Not understanding that they're different players, different companies, different energy uses, sometimes different types of ownerships. Like these nuances are actually really important. So one of the things that we do at NABERS, and maybe a core part of the rating, and why this is so important to this conversation, is that what we want to do in NABERS is compare buildings, like how sustainable they are, or facilities, against buildings that are directly comparable to them. So if you are a cold store, we don't want to compare you against a warehouse, because it's the non-meaningful comparison. We want to say how much energy you're using against all the cold stores in similar climate conditions, maybe operating in a similar manner. You talked about a blast freezing, which is really important. The cold store's been the cold chain has been such a big part of the news in the last 12 months, partly because the food supply chains changed quite a bit with supermarkets just really growing in demand, but also partly because vaccines. A lot of us have been learning so much about vaccines and how important the cold store is in that process. So what we're trying to do in NABERS is creating sustainability tools, and particularly we have a NABERS energy rating tool, which is really our headline rating tool, where we compare, and the aim is to compare cold stores against similar cold stores operating in similar conditions. Are you using more or less than comparable sites? And that really is at the core of a NABERS rating. One thing that we try to do with that is actually translating that, and there's a lot of statistics and technical work that goes behind that, but the end result of a NABERS rating is actually designed so a lot of more people can participate in that conversation. So we express everything into a star rating. And if you get a 3-star, just so you get an idea of how it works, you get a 3-star rating. That means that you're using an average amount of energy compared to a similar cold store of the same size, same operational conditions in the same climate zone. So you basically operate in an average energy performance level. But not all cold stores are average. Some of them will use more energy, right? So if you're using more energy, it means that you get a lower NABERS rating. Maybe you get 2 stars or 1.5 stars. And what that means is that, yes, you're using more energy, but also it means that you have lots of opportunities, probably lower cost opportunities to improve. There's a lot of money to be saved if you're using a lot more energy than average. There's probably quite a few opportunities there. And then there's also cold stores that have been putting a lot of time and effort to become really energy performant, energy efficient. And if you get a 4 or 5 star, the maximum in NABERS is 6 stars. And you're using less energy than similar cold stores of the same size, it's actually an opportunity for recognition. You can demonstrate to a lot of people that you are actually doing really well. You're one of the most efficient cold stores in the country. So the star rating is really designed for everybody, not just for the leaders. And it's a direct comparison. It tells you how well you're doing against all this. It's using all kinds of ways, and this, I feel like this answer was a little bit long already. But
no, this is exactly what we're looking for, because one of the things is that government will need to ensure a robust structure of support, especially for the smaller companies, to enable investment in expensive new equipment or upgrades ahead of any rating system coming into force, to prevent asset value crashes and risking that they be left behind, I think. So this is a really good overview that you're giving to say that you are treating these places differently.
100%. And it's interesting you bring the topic of government, because NABERS ratings are used in a lot of different ways. And maybe one thing I haven't mentioned is why NABERS is still going, because most government programs only last for a couple of years. So a program going on for 22, 23 years, but at this point is really unusual. And the reason for that is that the average, so we work with thousands of buildings a year, and the participants in NABERS have actually saved energy at the fastest rate in the world. And it's really fast. I think the last decade, the average building participating in NABERS dropped energy use by about like 33, 34%. That's the average building. So there are sites or facilities that you save a lot more than that. So that's not cherry picking, it's just the average. The Australian economy, in most the building sector, or the 50% of electricity users that are often called buildings, including cold stores, and the reduction in energy consumption was much less than 33, 34%. It's part of the reason why NABERS has been used in New Zealand. It's actually just started to operate in the United Kingdom, and why buildings are reducing energy in sites so quickly. There's lots of reasons, but one of them is it's actually really difficult to, number one, to know how well you're performing against other sites. Like if you're a cold store operator,
of course,
and we actually hear this a lot, particularly on sites that are very heavy on refrigeration, because climate is a really important factor, right? Like if you have a cold store in Darwin or in Melbourne, Darwin is a lot hotter, so you do have a sense that site is going to use more energy. but how much more energy? What is the impact of a site used for that level, of that magnitude? And you move it to Darwin. Is that 3% more energy? Is it 20% more energy? Is it 40% more energy? They only, and if the site is bigger or smaller or is used for other purpose, is the impact of climate the same? It's actually a really difficult question to answer. Most people just don't know. They don't have the data because they see how well their clusters are performing, but they don't see their competitors. Or maybe they're operating Sydney and Melbourne, but they don't really have data from other sites across Australia. So what we do in NABERS is we actually account for factors like that. We look at data across the country from lots of different operators, and we see, actually, if you move a site of these facilities, you move it to another climate zone from Sydney to Brisbane, there's like, a 4% impact on energy consumption on average. And if you go further and you bring it up the East Coast all the way to Cairns, which is a lot, already sort of like in the tropical climate zone spectrum, that's another, 4 or 5%. So we can quantify the impact of climate, and we can do a fair comparison of cold stores, in spite of the fact that some of them will be in hotter or colder zones. And anyway, so there's lots of nuance to a NABERS rating, but really what we're trying to do is be able to do a comparison that is very difficult in practice.
Yeah, and look, there's also comparisons that need to be done with, there are very old facilities. These buildings, some of them have been up around and functioning for the last 50 years. It's very different to something that's been constructed in the last 12 months with all the with everything in place to conserve energy, particularly. And so, I think, number one, we mentioned small to medium in comparison to the large, but also how new facilities are, if they are fully automated, if they've got a lot of people in them, if the doors remain shut for longer, all sorts of things need to be taken into consideration. I agree. On that, is the NABERS scheme for warehouses proposed as a mandatory disclosure scheme at this stage?
It isn't. It is not proposed for mandatory disclosure. It's basically a voluntary scheme, but that doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of government programs that are built off the back of this, and a lot of them are about actual incentives. There's a lot of carrots built when with a NABERS rating. Part of the reason why a lot of governments really want us to expand to new sectors is that a lot of policies at the state level and at the Australian government level already use NABERS to provide financial incentives. Sometimes it's like grants, sometimes it's if you improve energy efficiency, we'll give you a booster. So it's not just saving money on site, but the government actually gives you a financial incentive for every kilowatt hour you save. But if you don't have a NABERS rating for that sector is kind of out of those incentives. So and just to give you a few examples of that, the Victorian government has a scheme called the Victorian Energy Upgrades, very big energy efficiency scheme. In New South Wales, it's called the Energy Savings Scheme. In South Australia, it's one called the REAS. They're basically effectively the same program. They all have slightly different methods, but it's like lots of money for energy efficiency. If you save energy, you get a booster for every kilowatt hour you save. All those systems have methods using NABERS that are really streamlined. They're really easy to use to participate and get that booster. If your rating is improving over time, you will save more than just the energy on site. You will get this additional financial incentive. But if you don't have NABERS ratings, that method doesn't exist. So that's part of the reason why we're bringing NABERS in here. And that's not the only way NABERS ratings are used. Maybe let me give you another example. So this is like pure carrot. Now let's talk a little bit more about it, like investors in finance, which is always a growing topic and important to all sectors of the economy. We have a lot of companies that use NABERS ratings to actually demonstrate that they are some of the most sustainable companies, not just in Australia, but in the world in that space. So it's a mechanism to demonstrate that to investors, and what they get in return is actually more investment in the companies, or the stock price goes up if you're publicly listed. Sometimes it's just private investors wanting to go into your company and expanding the size of your company. So there's a lot of incentive in terms of attracting investors. And we've seen this, it's part of the reason, if maybe just drawing a parallel with a sector that's very different, but also very exposed to investment in shopping centers. A lot of people participate in NABERS and improve year on year because finance has become so important for them, and investors are really starting to look every year more and more into sustainability. So they know that this is a way that we can't stop. It's just growing every year. But you can actually, if you're proactive and you do sooner, earlier, and you improve your portfolio, you can actually attract finance from a lot more people that only want to invest in companies that are just really committed to the environment, doing really great work. And a lot of them are seeing those returns. They're in the newspapers all the time. They get green bonds, really good finance at really low rates. And I think that is something that is really common to all the sectors that are exposed to the financial markets and investors. And a lot of companies that work in cold stores do. Some of them are publicly listed. Yep. Most of them need finance of some sort at some points in time, including loans. Banks are looking to increasingly to lend more and more. In some people estimate that in 3 or 4 years, the majority of lending is going to have some requirements on sustainability. So it's kind of a way that is external, like none of us really influence it, but you can really ride it and your company can really benefit from that. And I'm actually really interested in part of the group we're doing in the next 12 months is actually exploring that with a lot of people in these sectors. It's not just about building the NABERS rating tool, but also about how can we actually allow the Australian market to really benefit from that and being, a world leader in that space and getting all the benefits that come with that.
That's there's a lot of consolidation going on in our industry at the present time. So the financial side of it and investing is going to appeal to a lot of people out there at the present time, I'm sure. And also any sort of financial gains that companies can garner to assist them with the costs, because obviously costs are going up everywhere. It's an essential service. They're required 24/7, and particularly presently, at the time with all of these shutdowns, they're, doing double time. So any extras that can be given to encourage good energy proficiency is going to be most definitely appreciated.
Couldn't agree more.
There have been quite a few RWTA members that are presently participating in this process already. So with this in mind, what's the timeline for the development of the scheme?
So the timeline is we plan for this development process to last for 12 months. So we're starting that literally. We just kicked in the process. So we've been engaging with you and a number of people in this space for a few months. But the all in, let's put the team together and work really closely with the sector is literally 1st of July. So we just started a couple of weeks ago. And the plan is to launch by the 30th of June next year. So that means like the certification scheme and training, everything going completely out and being publicly available. And there's actually quite a few ways that we can work with a lot of organizations along the way. And one of them is actually sitting in our working group. So we have a working group often of a lot of big and small players, a lot of champions, a lot of people who are really interested in who are doing a lot of great work already. And we sit with them, we actually work together, and they also help us get a lot of data. So some of these things that I was talking about before, about what is the impact of climate, the only way to answer that is getting high quality data from multiple different players. And so we use that group for data collection, but then they help us design the tool. What is the impact of height in a cold store? What is the impact of having, warehouses that are designed to store things for a long time? They're not open very often, versus cold stores that are, there are things going in and out all the time. They're just different uses. How do we capture that in a variable? How do we capture that consistently? What information can we actually use in a way that is going to be a really robust way of measuring that? So those are answers. I'm really passionate into refrigeration, but I haven't worked in that space anywhere near as much as actual companies and professionals in that space. So we get a lot of advice from that group, and they really help us build a tool that is going to be really good and relevant. And that is the first 2/3 of this year. So we usually hit, I want to say, around March or April next year, 2022, so in 8 or 9 months from now, with a tool that is more or less complete but untested. And we spend the last 2 or 3 months doing pilots. So a lot of people in that side, we often have a little bit of budget, and we actually bring a NABERS assessor, somebody who already knows how to do ratings. We train them in these draft rules, and then we actually send them into maybe 5 or 10 different pilot ratings in different cities, different types of sites. And we use that final data to refine that standard, because one thing that is really important for us is that we don't just don't want just something that is robust. It also needs to be as lower cost as we can. So we really need to streamline this, use information that exists for the most part in industry already. You know, if a sector is not collecting area information, for example, it's really hard to ask for that, because you have to pay a lot of money just to go and measure, and no one is going to use it for anything else. But if people are already measuring area, then it's great, because it's documentation we can use right away. So that we're looking for those streamlining, because we want to keep the best rating that we can create, but also low cost. So a lot of people have access to it, and it doesn't have to be just really big players. It's also available for small and medium players, which often are the majority of these sectors, right? Like, and a lot of small and medium businesses.
Absolutely. So look, finally, once the tool's launched, why should cold storage facilities, in your opinion, participate?
I think I mentioned a couple of these reasons already. One of them is that it provides you with an opportunity to compare yourself against competitors in other cold stores across the country, and that means that sites that don't get a great NABERS rating means that they actually often have lots of opportunities for improvement, and those opportunities are often low cost. So it's a good way to identify sites that are at that level, but also sites that are doing really well. It's actually an opportunity to promote it. So a lot of what we provide is recognition, star ratings, a lot of materials for that to be communicated. We also have a platform ourselves where we reach lots of investors and companies and professionals in this space. So we'll definitely help you promote that and get as many kudos as you can out of that achievement. And there's also the reasons around finance, accessing incentives from government.
Absolutely.
As well as, getting more access to finance or better finance, or just demonstrating to investors that you are, if in the forefront of innovation in sustainability, that your company really cares about this. And we have a team that is really eager to work with you. We know that we're not experts in cold stores. That's why we need to work together. But we have done a lot of work in sustainability. We do have a lot of access to particularly the finance market and investors. And so I do think that working together, we can do a lot in a few years' time, to actually have placed the Australian cold store sector as a sector is really world leading in sustainability. And a lot of the green shoots and a lot more than that are already there. We have a very, very highly skilled industry. So we're in an opportunity to really, take and use this as an advantage, a competitive advantage against other countries in competing sectors. And for me, this is an opportunity for us to really, go all in, industry and government working together to get those benefits and get the most out of it.
Sounds fantastic. Thank you, Carlos, for discussing NABERS with me today. The RWTA will continue to encourage the cold chain to participate in this scheme. Thank you so much for the overview.
Thank you. And thanks for the invite. It's great to be here.
Okay. Talk again soon, I hope.
I hope so. Take care, and I enjoy the sun up there in Brisbane.
I certainly will. Thank you so much. See you later.